Welcome to Suffolk Matters, where all of Suffolk County meets the men and women of Suffolk AME. News, opinions, and insights you won't hear anywhere else. Here's your host, the president of New York's largest independent union, Suffolk AME's Dan Leveler.
Welcome to another edition of Suffolk Matters on Walk 97.5 and 94.3 The Shark, where Suffolk County meets the men and women of Suffolk AME. News and views you can't hear anywhere else. So my guest this morning is the presiding officer in Suffolk County, Rob Calarco. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Dan. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. It's always our pleasure. You've been on this show a number of times. We've had many things to discuss over the years. But, you know, maybe a little celebration for us and our workforce. You know, you've always been an ally of labor, just in general, but very recently, the first responder bill was passed on the state level and signed into law by Governor Hochul. And I want to thank you for coordinating the efforts down in Suffolk County to get a bipartisan group of legislators together with our members and help us call for that bill. So thank you.
No, absolutely. Listen, we want to support our workforce and certainly the folks who work in those 911 call centers, whether it's in the police department or doing the dispatch out of Frez. They have difficult jobs, and they are truly the front line. You know, they're the first person somebody talks to who's in crisis and has an emergency situation going on. And so this was duly needed, and it was the right thing for the state to do. And we're so happy that Governor Hochul made it a priority of hers.
Yeah, you know, and again, for us, there's so many people to thank, but we don't want to miss anyone, and especially, you know, again, the efforts that you put together to, again, put this bipartisan group together with our members. You know, it's very important to us. So, but you know, speaking of Governor Hochul, it's probably a little early to say, but you know, how do you feel things are going with her handling of the state of New York in this past month or so?
Yeah, well, listen, let me first say I've had the opportunity to meet with the governor when she was lieutenant governor a number of times, including a few one-on-ones where she sat down and talked to me about what was going on in Suffolk County. And what was really impressive to me about her was she really dug into what was going on locally and what was going on the ground in the county. And I think it reflects where she came from in terms of coming out of local government, having served for so long in town government, over in the Buffalo area. And I think that she brings that approach. And she certainly has been bringing a pretty steady hand to state government and has been doing a pretty good job, in my opinion, this last month or so of showing that nothing is going to slip through the cracks, and she was and is fully ready to take over.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. It's been our observation that as lieutenant governor, she was very accessible, but also very knowledgeable. And when this most recent situation unfolded and she found herself as governor of New York, I remember her saying, listen, you know, that's part of being lieutenant governor, is ready to step in and be governor. And that's my take on what has actually happened. I think she's very well versed. I think that she's savvy, knows how to, you know, deal with some of these stickier issues, but also, you know, accessible and willing to have the conversations. You know, maybe the last governor was less concerned about what people wanted to talk about and more concerned about getting done what he wanted to. So.
Yeah, I think that's one of a good observation. She certainly wants to know what's going on in and around the state. She certainly is trying to reach out and have those conversations. But I think she's also shown that she's willing to, step up and make the hard decisions that sometimes you have to do as a governor. It's not an easy job. You're not going to make everybody happy, but she's trying to make the right decisions by the whole state, and I think she's proven that out.
Yeah, so, and it's good that you guys have a working relationship already in place, but, you know, do you have any plans on any initiatives or any approach that you are looking to take with the current governor?
Yeah, I think what we're going to try to do is certainly, we were always fortunate in Suffolk County, and despite the issues associated with the past governor, Governor Cuomo was very good to delivering for our region.
Right.
And I think that, what we're going to be looking to do with Governor Hochul is to make sure, and as I said, she wants to know what's going on locally, but make sure she really knows what are the issues that matter to Suffolk County residents. What are the things that we need for our region to grow? whether it's pursuing additional help from them on wastewater, especially expanding sewers and doing investments there, to how do we grow our economy. I think we're going to be really focusing on talking to her and her folks and building those relationships so that they know what are the needs of our region.
Yeah, and I would say already there's been some conversation on infrastructure, right? And the portions in Suffolk County that are state responsibility that have long kind of been waiting for, I don't even want to say redesign, but at least, like the necessary maintenance work and replacement in some instances where necessary. So that, I take that as an encouraging sign to see that that's part of the thought process already.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, listen, I've even heard, and thank God for this, that they're actually going to be putting out a major repaving of the expressway.
Yeah.
And certainly a number of us early in the year went out there to say, hey, these state roads are in dire need of work. And so something like repaving a large section of the expressway is long overdue. And here's the other good thing that I think the Governor Hochul can take advantage of is as the federal infrastructure bill hopefully makes its way through to final approval, there'll be access to additional dollars from the federal government that's going to allow both the state as well as the county and local governments to undertake some really important infrastructure projects.
Yeah, I think, again, very much a good idea to be looking at and thinking about these things. I know I get calls about the conditions of those roads, so I am absolutely sure that you and the rest of the legislature are getting calls on these roads. And I think it's a great thing that, again, this governor is now understanding, hey, this is a priority and needs to be handled. It's going to be a popular issue down here. There'll be that little bit of inconvenience as the work is done. But at the end of the day, people seeing this progress, like, hey, we've been calling for this and it's getting done, I think that's going to have an impact. But speaking of money and work and all of that stuff, let's get into what we like to do every year, which is the awkward and uncomfortable conversation surrounding both the proposed operating budget and the proposed capital budget, because. Listen, I think the taxpayers want to know that their money is being utilized efficiently to get the services provided to them that they rely on. I know we talked about, the 911 system and having that very first of first responders there and able to pick up the phone when they need them. But same goes for all government services, right?
Sure.
You don't think about it. It's like a utility. You don't think about it till you need it. And when you need it, you want it to work. And this is all part of the process of figuring this stuff out, and that's part of the work that you've been doing. Getting a working group together and working on all this stuff. But what would be your initial take on what you would hope to see as priorities in this next operating budget?
Yeah, and let me go back to something you said real quick, because you mentioned how government's like a utility and you don't know you need it till you need it.
Right.
That's especially true for county government, because we are the level that does the health and safety and welfare of the residents, and you really do not know it's there and doing the work it's doing until the time comes for it. And over the last year and a half of living through the COVID pandemic, it has been county employees who have been up in front and dealing with it on the forefront. And that's a lot of AME employees. So let me first thank you and all your members for the hard work they do day in and day out on that. We're in an interesting place in Suffolk County this year, and it's a dilemma that I never thought I'd face, which is we are in an extremely good position budgetarily.
Right.
We are looking at having a $500 million surplus over the next 3 years. I think we ended up closing out the books last year with around $120 million surplus. That is the first time in my 10 years as a legislator that we've been dealing with surpluses and not deficits. And I think it's because of some really tough decisions that we made, and it's certainly partly due to some of the help from the federal government, but it's also partly due to changes that have happened in the economy due to COVID. We have had a lot of people in Suffolk County who maybe commuted to work in the city in the past, who are now working from home, spending their money here.
Right.
We've had a lot of people who have moved out to Suffolk County, as the census numbers are showing. who had lived in the city before, and that means they're spending their money here. And the other part of it that really is driving some of this is they also couldn't take vacations. Right? So you couldn't go away. So a lot of residents, well, what did they do? Especially those who were the white-collar workers who were able to transition to working from home. They started putting, work into their homes. They started spending money on landscaping. They bought boats. They did things that spent their money here in Suffolk County, which was great for us. Because as you know, our revenues, our biggest source is that sales tax revenue. So when people are spending money in Suffolk County, tax revenue comes to Suffolk County to provide for our resources. So we're in this really great position right now. And we now have this opportunity to do two things, which is first and foremost, some reinvestment back into the workforce in Suffolk County. When you have 10 years of constantly dealing with budget deficits, you're always trying to figure out how do you squeeze every last bit out without having to spend any more than you have to. And now we have a surplus, and we can start putting back into some of the departments that have been understaffed for a considerable period of time now. That's a lot of departments, really. Like there's probably not one within the county that I can't point to without showing there's a need.
You're
I'm
preaching
sure
to the
you'd be happy to do that. But certainly, we brought up the 911 operators, the call takers there, and the dispatchers. That unit certainly needs, I think, more staffing and more investment to make sure that we continue to have the good people doing that work. It's hard work. It is not exactly one of the top paid jobs in Suffolk County, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of that unit. But it's also things from laborers who are taking care of our roads, taking care of our facilities. It's the custodians. It's also the engineers in DPW who are putting out the bids. I hear from the contractor community, the people who actually do a lot of the large road projects, right? Because we don't do those ourselves. We put them out. And they're frustrated because things are not getting out the door. And this was part of our conversation during the capital budget working group. And one of the things that the department said very clearly was, hey, we can't get this many projects out the door in a year because we simply don't have enough staffing to do so.
That's correct.
So there are a lot of places in the health department. If there's ever a place that we saw over this last year a need to reinvest, and it's interesting, for years, there were efforts to completely defund our public health nurses. And they showed their worth and then some 10 times over in this last year, especially as we had hundreds and hundreds of county employees shifting over to doing the kind of work that they do with contact tracing, right?
Yes.
So I think there are a lot of places that we need to be looking at putting in the rank and file employees who do the day-to-day work of Suffolk County government.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. You have been basically, there's no better way to say it, but a specialist in dealing with budgets that hurt, right? Making hard decisions that maybe, you and the working group didn't want to make, you and the legislature didn't want to make, and it was all to get through this period of austerity, right? Yes. But all of that notwithstanding, I love the new challenge of working with a budget where you say, how can we fix things? And some of the things that we've brought up, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouths. So I would just say, one of the things that we looked at is where overtime costs exceeded the cost of an additional employee. We're worried about burning out a valuable portion of the workforce simply because they're just working so many hours. And that's something that's cost neutral to the taxpayer, but actually yields better benefits, right? That better results in the services itself. But again, at the end of the day, it's going to be, whatever the budget contains, it's going to be a discussion, right? There's going to be internal discussions on your end. There's going to be, our ability to ask whether it's the administration or the legislature to take into consideration certain things that we know about. But I agree wholeheartedly. We need to see an expansion on this workforce in order to provide the services that people rely on.
It's going to be one of the big tasks. And the only other part of the budget that we need to do now is certainly take the actions necessary to mitigate any potential challenges when next time the economy turns down.
Sure.
And that will happen, and we really don't even know when that will happen, right? And so we need to make sure that we start building up our reserves again. The Tax Stabilization Reserve Fund has been depleted to pretty much where there's nothing left to take out of it because of dealing with austerity for these last few years, right? So we will be putting some money back in there. In fact, as per our charter, we're required to put at least 25% of surplus revenues, that when we have a surplus at the end of a year, into that tax stabilization reserve fund. So there'll be a certain dedicated amount. Certainly into a pension reserve fund would be a smart thing to do as well.
Sure.
Because usually what happens when the economy gets soft and isn't doing as well, the stock market isn't doing very well, then the pension fund managed by the state doesn't do as well, and it's not as if those pensions don't get paid. It's just they take a bigger portion from local government to help make up the difference. And listen, I have no problem with that. I think we should and do owe our retirees a decent pension and a defined pension, and so I'm good with it. But we need to make sure that we're taking the steps necessary to provide that cushion. And one of the other things that we actually may be able to do, because in the past, when pension costs really skyrocketed on us, and they pretty much almost doubled in a matter of 2 or 3 years, was we had to borrow from the state pension fund, and we are still paying some of that borrowing back. Right. And if we have revenues, we can pay off some of that borrowing now, which will be a one-time payment now to free us of that yearly debt service that we pay back on it. And it also will make our contribution amount a little lower, because when we don't have that extra debt from the past, the percentage that they charge us will actually go down a little bit.
Yeah, no, and I think debt service is one of the important points to look at, and there's a few ways to look at it, right? There's traditional borrowing that needs to be done. Then there's borrowing that's done during these austerity measures. And paring down some of that debt means that taxpayer resources go back into providing services and not making up for periods of loss. And with that being said, there's the other component, right? And it really kind of touches on the capital budget. And that's making sure that the maintenance work that kind of maybe had to go to the wayside. This is something I've said several times. When the average person pays their tax bill, they know it gets divided up a little bit here and a little bit there and a whole bunch over here and whatever else. But generally speaking, their tax bill in their mind is their tax bill. And when they come to the county to, receive whatever service or look into whatever service that they're looking for, to see, the conditions of the buildings and the grounds and everything else. If you say, if you can't handle my money on cutting the grass, how are you handling my money on other things? Now, again, we know a good job's being done, right? Our members are dedicated and altruistic in nature. They're going to plug ahead and get this work done. But it's about like that perception on the taxpayer side and tying that back into this debt service. If maintenance goes too long, when we move away from things like grass and getting, garbage removal done and like basic maintenance, and we get into the conditions of buildings, county-owned properties that have deteriorated because the maintenance wasn't there, well, now it gets expensive, right? So in
give
planning.
you a good example of that right now, Dan, and that's in our medical examiner's building. And, of course, our medical examiner provides a really critical component of service that county government that most people don't know of, right? And it's not just performing autopsies. They provide the full-fledged forensic analysis for our police department and our district attorney, with the exception of fingerprinting. So it is doing everything from dealing with people who have unfortunately passed away to dealing with the testing to prove ballistic testing, to doing testing to show what kind of drugs may have been confiscated. They do the whole gamut. Right. And the building that they operate from, I think, was built, 40 or 50 years ago now, and has been in dire need of maintenance. And that maintenance had been delayed year after year after year. And now it's come home to roost. And so next year in our capital budget, which we just wrapped up our working group work for now and we'll be voting on next month, is looking at a $30 million investment to completely rebuild basically the medical examiner's offices and space. We have to relocate them, go in, gut the facility, rebuild it, because the hoods and all those other things that we're supposed to be dealing with stuff. And remember, they're dealing with a lot of things in there, so there's a lot of toxic materials, and we got to make sure that the workplace is safe for the employees in there. Right. We've delayed it so much that now we're looking at having to completely rebuild that building.
Yeah.
And that gets to some of the bigger cost items. But you touched on another pet peeve of mine, Dan, which is, what the county buildings and our parks, and certainly our parks are very well maintained and are beautiful, but the way our county grounds look when the people show up, when they come to the Dennison building or they come to our building in Hauppauge or out to the Riverhead complex to get their services, and they look around and the beds around the buildings are unwieldy with weeds and garbage and litter. It really gives people an impression that the county government isn't really paying attention to what's going on. And I think that's someplace that we really need to fix and change the way we look at it, because we are the face. Mm-hmm. That is the first impression that people get of what county government is. And it makes a difference. You can talk to people and they go down south and they say, the roads are all nice, and I go to these buildings and they're all really beautiful and maintained, and it doesn't really matter what else is going on. That's the impression people get, and you have to deal with that.
Yeah. Well, these buildings traditionally throughout our country's history, they've been a civic resource, right?
Yeah,
so not just in Suffolk County, but across. And they were designed better, they were built better, and they were maintained better because they were a civic resource. It was respected. It was respect for the taxpayers that drove that. Now, again, we understand austerity happened. Certain decisions had to be made. You talk about pet peeves and you talk about maintenance. A pet peeve of mine, if we're gonna take down some trees and we're gonna kind of do the wood chipping on it and then pay to send that wood chip somewhere else to be disposed of and then buy mulch from someone else, that's not government efficiency. These are the types of things I look for. I know that you look for as well.
Sure.
And there are a number of examples where, moving forward, we've got to be smart about the future, right? And again, that reserve fund, I think, is a tremendously important resource for the taxpayers to know that if there's another dip, we're going to be able to get through a little easier next time. We need to learn from this pandemic. Just on the fiscal side, we need to learn from that to realize that these things are going to happen. And also on the health side, we need to realize that, we've got to be prepared. Right now, Governor Hochul is doing everything necessary to kind of ramp up resources to make sure there's enough medical personnel trained to deliver the services necessary across the state, especially on the vaccination side. But your government should have that flexibility, should be able to do those things. So having reserve funds in place is one way to accomplish two tasks. One, to mitigate that next, kind of austerity measure that may come in and hopefully minimize that. And two, to have that, having the resources available to be flexible to whatever situation may arise.
Absolutely. And listen, like a tax stabilization reserve fund doesn't just help us avoid high tax increases. It also helps us avoid any kind of reductions in services, right? And that's the other part of that. And I think that's the part that we really are looking at, is how do we make sure that we have that so it can carry us through some tougher times.
So, just getting into one last piece of revenue that has come in that was maybe not anticipated, but a very good thing for Suffolk County. I guess the recognition by the courts that there was a, to whatever extent, and I don't want to paraphrase from any of the rulings that I read, but there was some deliberate action on the part of the pharmaceutical companies.
I'll say it, Dan, because it was certainly my legislation that actually spearheaded Suffolk County initiating this lawsuit, and we were the first in the state, one of the first in the country to do this. And in my opinion, it's unequivocal that especially the pharmaceutical manufacturers engaged in deceptive practices, especially as it pertained to educating or really miseducating our doctors about the hazards and potential harm of opioid-based painkillers.
Right.
And the fact that they were extremely addictive, and they downplayed that severely. And I think they knew that they were doing that. And so we haven't had a verdict yet in any
Right.
case. But at this point in time, we have been settling with a number of the entities involved, and it's not just the pharmaceutical manufacturers; it's the middlemen distributors like AmerisourceBergen and Cardinal
Right.
Health, who should have flagged that there were large quantities of opioid painkillers flooding across our country that far exceeded what was a reasonable expectation of what could be used.
Staggering numbers.
And they had an obligation under the FDA law to monitor that. And it's
Right.
the same goes for some of the pharmacies like the CVS's and Walgreens and everybody else. And really the pharmaceutical companies created this gravy train and everybody jumped on board.
Right.
And it has been staggering the price that we have paid as a society. Last year alone, I think in the country there was over 90,000 overdose deaths.
Right.
The highest ever, which was severely compounded by the isolation people were experiencing during the COVID shutdowns. And so we need to be able to deal with this problem. And
Sure.
we are very fortunate at this point in time. We are looking at, between all the settlements we have, of between $150 and $200 million over the next 10 years to put towards this. And it's funny, Dan, I was talking to a reporter the other day, and I quoted her that number, and she goes, "Oh, you mean that's for the state?" And I said, "No, that's
County.
for Suffolk County alone." And it is a reflection, and they tell you how some of these numbers are come up with. There is a formula that was created, and it's driven partly out of the number of overdose deaths we had in the county, partly from the number of people who've been diagnosed with addiction disorder, partly from the amount of treatment programs that we've had to put into place, and our population size, and the amount of prescription drugs that have flowed into our have
Sure.
come into our county. And so Suffolk County is getting one of the largest percentages, and because we were also the first to bring the action,
Right.
we are getting extra money for that reason as well. And this is so direly needed,
Yeah.
because we need to be able to put this money into providing additional resources, whether it's treatment programs, prevention programs. The Department of Health used to have a pretty robust program, K through 12, of Health Smart,
Sure.
that did educational programs for kids that were appropriate for each grade level,
Right.
of things they needed to know so they would avoid drugs. Right? It took over the DARE program when DARE went away about
Right.
10 years ago.
Right.
And we have not been able to put that out in the way that we used to. So that's, it's those kind of programs. It's prevention services. It's treatment programs. It's ongoing maintenance programs. It's programs like, drug-assisted programs like Suboxone and Methadone,
Right.
and those kind of things.
Yeah.
And the county is running some of those clinics, and some of this is done by not-for-profit partners.
Right.
But this money is going to be really critical to helping put towards finally dealing with and ending the opioid epidemic.
Yeah, and listen, to some extent, I mean, you touched on it already. The county has been providing these services, trying to mitigate this stuff, and doing so without settlement money. So to be able to recover some of what was spent and help combat this issue, I mean, it's out there, right? People have gotten on it, and unfortunately, some people succumb to the addiction. And
Dan, who would have ever thought of it when it was first happening? It was we were one of the first in the state to give Narcan, which
Right.
is the antidote to an overdose of opioids, in every police car. But we quickly went beyond that, right? And we started having the health department provide Narcan to anybody
Right.
who wanted it. We would get it to them. We would run a training. We teach them how to administer it, what signs they needed to look for, so they knew when to administer it, and started handing out dosages to anyone in the public who wanted it, because the problem became that prevalent. And it's really heartbreaking when you are at these programs. And as a legislator, we've hosted some of the forums.
Sure.
And our health department has done a great job coming out. And a lot of times Dr. Piggott, before he was a commissioner,
Right.
was running those himself. But you have parents who are coming in and taking, getting the lesson, the training and getting the dosages, because they know that their child is using, and that if they, God forbid, walked into their child's bedroom one night and they were in the middle of an
Yeah.
overdose, that they'd be able to respond. It is, really tragic, and certainly These settlements aren't going to bring back anybody that we've lost, and I'm sure won't bring the full solace that any of these families are looking for. But at least we are going to have availability of providing resources. And we've also, and this is the one thing when I first brought this, and I was asked by somebody, how much are you suing them for? I said, first and foremost, it's about changing their behavior.
Yeah.
We want them to admit what they're doing. And while they've not admitted fault through these settlements, what they have done is Johnson & Johnson is no longer manufacturing opioid-based prescription drugs.
Right.
Purdue Pharma the Sackler family is selling the company, and the company's going to transition to providing, producing drugs to help with treatment as opposed to the prescription medication painkillers. We have changed the behavior, and not only that, we've changed the dynamic so that our doctors and our prescribers in the medical profession understand exactly the dangers that are involved and are only prescribing these medications when they're really necessary and appropriate.
Yeah, and just going back to the numbers, it was staggering how much of these products were being pushed out into the world in unnecessary situations. So it's a very good thing to be able to recover those resources and try and continue to fight this crisis as it continues to be an issue, across the country and the world. And you know what? This morning we've talked about a whole host of things that you've worked on across your career as a legislator and now as presiding officer. And I think, it's important to point out that you are running for re-election this year. And I think the people of Suffolk County can realize, just listening through what we've talked about, why it's important to have someone like you on legislature. But, can you just share with us, I guess, a little bit on maybe some district issues that you've been focused on and
Sure. And as I'm running, as you said, for re-election, and this will be for my sixth term, which would also be my final term if I'm so fortunate to be reelected. And, one of the things I tell people about local government is that it is work that you can touch and feel and see,
Right.
and there's things that you accomplish. And certainly looking back at the things that we've done in my district to do what I think is any elected official's job, which is to understand what a community wants, what its goals are, especially when you represent more than one area. It's one thing if you're the mayor of the village of Patchogue, you're only focused on the village of Patchogue, and our mayor does a great job, by the way, Paul Vanieri.
Yes, he does.
But it is, I have a multiple communities, a very diverse district that all have their different desires and needs and things they want to get done. But we're really able to accomplish some of those things. So, last year, this is a great project that the county took on, and the Department of Public Works folks really helped spearhead through, was our Keenan Lake project. And we've spoken about it in the past. We refilled the lake last year. It is beautiful now. People are out there in canoes and paddleboards and really enjoying that lake as they once had.
Right.
And in fact, we were able to really expand access as part of the project for the residents from around the area, which is great. And we expanded access to Patchogue Lake, too. There was a great project to redesign the county road as it came into Main Street, Waverly Avenue.
Sure.
And it loops around Blue Point Brewery. And we created a nice park-like atmosphere and access on Patchogue Lake. Up in Medford, we built a band shell to host our concerts that we do every year. We really are getting a lot of good stuff done throughout the district. Really changing the way things are. And there's some stuff we want to get done. I want to get Patchogue sewered. I have a park in Blue Point we want to get constructed.
Nice.
But those are the things that I want to try to wrap up in my last 2 years of office.
Absolutely. I got to say, we've had these conversations a lot, right? You've been not only available to AME in terms of having these conversations as relates to our working environment, our members, but also we've had these conversations on the airwaves. And I think it's been clear throughout this whole time why we have consistently stood behind you every time you run. And we absolutely, I think the people of Suffolk County in your role as presiding officer are well served. Having you not only reelected, but remaining as the presiding officer. So,
well, I really appreciate that, Dan. And certainly the way I approach what I do in government, and it's about helping people at the end of the day, and it's about making sure that we're doing the things we need to be doing, and that we're doing it fairly and treating people well. And you mentioned I'm the presiding officer, and I've been fortunate to be elected twice to that position by a large bipartisan vote.
Yeah.
And I think it shows that commitment and approach I take has really been effective and paid off.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Presiding Officer, Rob Calarco, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Again, just another big thank you from the beginning of the show, standing with us on getting the recognition necessary, helping to call for the recognition necessary for our very first of first responders.
Thank you very much for everything that you have done, and certainly for the members of AME. We in Suffolk County government can't do what we do if it wasn't for the members and the employees that are doing their day-to-day work. At the end of the day, government, it's about the employees that are doing the job, and your members are doing a great job on our behalf, and we appreciate it.
I appreciate you recognizing that fact. And to our listeners, we'll speak to you next week.